Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we're going to be going over the hanging bishop trap in the French defense. French defense starts out with e4, e6. One of the quickest ways to tilt someone playing e4 from white is to play the French defense. So e6 and then d4, d5. One of the most common responses for white is just to play knight c3, and then the Winawer variation with bishop b4. So all pretty common lines here. If white wants to get tricky, they can play the Alkehine Gambit, and that is knight to e2. It looks like it's blocking off this light square bishop, but white has other plans with this variation. I think it's pretty good because, yes, white does give up the pawn on e4, but they're able to get this back at a later variation. If you want me to do a dedicated video just on the Alkehine Gambit, feel free to let me know in the comments below. But in this particular variation, we are going to be looking at pawn to a3, forcing the bishop to move. Bishop's typically going to take on c3, and then the knight takes back here. You can see this knight already attacking the pawn on e4. Black can continue by saying, yeah, if you want to take that pawn, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and counterattack, get knight to c6. More pieces developed into the game plan. The queen and the knight are both attacking the pawn on d4. So how does white continue? Well, okay, they need to be pretty aggressive themselves. Bishop b5, pinning down the knight to the king here on e8. Knight to e7, similar as we saw before, the knight coming to e2. Is just saying, hey, if you want to take my knight, that's fine. I can just replace it with my own knight. And black also doesn't have to worry about the dark square bishop getting involved into the game. It's not blocking that off because the bishop from f8 already came in exchange on the c3 square. Now, if white wants to continue to put up the pressure, they can play bishop g5. These are all pretty common moves from white in the Alkehine Gambit. Not going out of the box just yet, and from here black can play pawn f6, saying yes, go ahead and force the bishop back. The bishop's usually going to come back to e3, just centralizing a little bit, keeping this pawn on e4 at bay. Doesn't want it to push up. Remember, white eventually wants to get this pawn back. They are down a pawn in material, and so getting that pawn back, and they just don't want to mess up their pawn structure themselves because that's how they're going to gain the advantage in the endgame. So bishop to e3, it also defends this pawn on d4, so both the bishop and the queen are defending it. Then we have f5 from black. So it says, hey, I want to hold on to this material on e4. You can see anytime black does this, it does weaken the king side board just a tad. So if they do decide to castle on the king side, just has a little bit of air in front of it that white can attack. Now, white can play queen to d2 to set up to castle on the queen side. And this is one of the concepts you'll usually see in the Alkehine Gambit is white's looking to castle on the queen side and then just throw everything at the king side of black, which usually if you're playing against the French defense, it's kind of this slow game and you don't have a lot of your attacking weapons. And so this is one variation that you'll see. It says, hey, I just want to throw everything at my opponent. That's why I played e4 in the first place. And so castling on the queen side is one way to do this. So after queen d2, we may see castle on the king side, castle on the queen side from white. Now knight d5. And this is where we start to get into what the trap would look like and how white can fall into a hanging bishop trap. Now from here, from white's perspective, they should really just take this knight on c6. Give black double pawns on the c file. It's not terrible for black. They can really control the center of the board with all of these pawns. They can really just overwhelm their opponent. But I think this is the better play for white because now they can just continue with what we talked about, h4, and just throw everything at the king side of the board. But they can make a big mistake. And so I think from black's standpoint, if you're playing the Winawer variation in the black French defense, I think this is something that you may come across, and I want you to be aware of how you can attack your opponent. And that is if they play bishop g5. Now this looks pretty strong. There's no pawn that can come and block this off. If they want to move their knight back, that seems a little odd, but they definitely could to defend this queen here. So how do they really defend the queen? They can move the queen for sure, but it looks like everything is protected. But unfortunately, it is not. Black has the move e3. And this is what white was trying to stop when they brought the bishop back to e3, is having black play the move e3. Black is still up that pawn in materials. You have to keep that in mind. And e3 stops the queen from protecting the bishop on g5. The first thing we have to understand is what are white's threats and what happens if they continue with their game plan. They play bishop to g5, attacking the queen. So if they just continue and take that queen, what can black do? Well, first thing, they can just take the queen on d2, but this is also check. And this is where white's going to lose in this variation because white has to deal with that threat. They take the pawn on d2, which that pawn, remember, was an extra pawn for black. So black already recognized that pawn was going to come off the board. Now it's just doing additional work, and it allows black now, because white had to deal with the check, to come back, take the bishop on d8. And so while both sides are equal in pawn material, black is now up an entire minor piece, in this case a knight. So that's not going to work. The bishop just coming down, taking on d8 is not going to work. So what's the other option? Well, if they take with their pawn on e3, well, now the queen no longer defending that bishop on g5, so the queen could just come up. So you can probably see the last row option is the bishop takes on e3. But this loses to the move pawn to f4. Now, there's a few variations we're going to look at on how they can continue. The first one is what happens if the bishop takes on f4. Well, this is not going to work because now the knight can take on f4. Let's say the bishop takes on c6. Well, now the pawn can take on c6. Yes, they can attack our knight if they want to, but the knight comes back here, and all of a sudden you can see black is up still that minor piece. They're up a bishop in this example, which is not going to go well for them. So the bishop taking on f4 is not a viable option, but the bishop is now trapped. So maybe they try something else. Maybe they go with knight takes on d5. Okay, well now black can play queen takes on d5. And you can see both the bishops are under attack. And we'll get to how they can both be hanging here in a second. But there's kind of two options we can look at from here. One is, what if the bishop now takes on f4? The knight's not on d5 anymore, so it can't take that bishop. But now black can just take the other bishop on b5. So that's not going to work because, again, you can see black is still up that minor piece. The other option is to go ahead and try to take this knight on c6. But now, black has two options. Yes, they could just go ahead if they wanted to and take the bishop on e3. And this is a viable threat that white's going to have a hard time dealing with, and it's okay for black. But black actually has an even better move, and that is to play the move queen to a2 because they are threatening queen to a1 checkmate. Okay, well, white really has to have some air cover so that the king can move out of here. But where do they really go? Okay, maybe queen to e2. That's one option for sure. But you can see both of these bishops are under attack, and black can start picking them off. The pawn takes here on c6. Both of the bishops are hanging. Now, from white's standpoint, how do they hold on to the other bishop? Well, they don't have a lot of options. If they come back to d2, well, that's checkmate. Okay, queen a1, that's going to be checkmate. So the only other option for this bishop is to play bishop takes on f4. And now you can see the rook comes up to f4. So both the bishops are hanging. There's just no way around it. At the end of the day, if we come back to the bishop coming to g5, attacking the queen, while it looks all fine because the queen is protecting it, black really has the dagger of pawn to e3. And at the end of the day, white is going to end up losing a minor piece, potentially more depending on how it goes from here. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this trap. I always like to look at different variations for some of the unique openings that I like to play, and the Winawer Variation in the French defense is definitely one that I like to play. So if you guys enjoyed this video, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button and letting me know in the comments below. If there's any other openings that you say do a lot of traps on this opening because I play it a lot, let me know. That lets me give me some ideas on where to focus for future videos. But thank you guys, and I'll see you in the next video.